The story begins in Ebelstein, a city steeped in old stone walls and medieval charm. Within its poorest districts lived an aging mage whom the slum dwellers mockingly called the false archmage. His title came from the simple truth that he could only wield one-star magic. Despite this limitation, the old man carried himself as if he were a legendary spellcaster, easily angered and quick to lash out at anyone who challenged his pride. From a distance, the protagonist quietly observed his teacher's restless expression. It was this very man who had first introduced him to magic. There had been no grand reason for becoming his apprentice, only convenience. The old mage needed students to inherit his crude techniques, and the boy sought knowledge wherever he could find it. Their goals happened to align. Time passed, marked by changing seasons and endless practice. One afternoon during training, a faint blue glow began to form around the boy's body. He clenched his jaw, struggling to restrain the energy surging through him. The sight stunned the old mage. Had the boy already grasped the natural circulation of mana? With resolve burning in his eyes, the boy took the next step. Power gathered in his palm before bursting outward in a sudden release. The spell took shape midair, forming a dense, shovel-like construct of magic that shot forward. The old mage could only stare as it slammed directly into a tree, splintering bark and shaking the ground. Teacher and student stood frozen, stunned by what they had just witnessed. That was how the boy spent an entire year, absorbing everything his master could teach. He ran errands, completed menial jobs, and slowly carved out his place as a one-star mage. One night, while they camped beneath the open sky, the old mage drank himself into a bitter mood. Slurring his words, he complained that noble children reached 3 stars before adulthood. He warned the boy not to dream too big, insisting that commoners could never break past 2 stars. According to him, bloodline determined everything, and effort meant nothing. The boy listened in silence, understanding that these words reflected his master's own regrets rather than truth. That night felt endless as he watched the old man eventually pass out. The next day, rain poured relentlessly as the boy returned to camp. What he found stopped him cold. His master lay motionless on the ground, his body battered and bruised as if he had fought desperately before dying. At first, the boy assumed the old mage had picked a reckless fight. The truth was far crueler. The old man had been beaten to death by city guards after being caught attempting to steal a 2-star spellbook. No one understood why a man who preached resignation would risk everything for advancement. As the boy stood there in shock, a translucent system interface appeared before his eyes. Memories of bloodlines and limitations echoed in his mind. None of it mattered to him. He possessed no noble lineage to rely on. The screen informed him that he had unlocked the fundamentals of magic and must now choose a primary magical path. From that moment on, 4 years passed in a blur. During that time, he met Quasar Flameheart, a formidable 3-star mage and former head of House Flameheart. Living in Ebelstein, she survived by taking mercenary contracts and eventually took the boy under her wing, teaching him real combat experience. Much of his growth occurred in Belden's Tier, a lively tavern where warriors and mages gathered. Quasar often reminded him that ambition was natural for a mage, and she acknowledged his talent without hesitation. But she warned him that unchecked desire could become a chain rather than a ladder. The boy accepted her words earnestly, promising to keep them close to heart. During one training session, Quasar instructed him to close his eyes and sense his mana. Calmly, carefully, he followed her guidance, visualizing the flow, shaping it with intent. A blue radiance enveloped his body, steady and controlled. Quasar noted that his mana reserves were unusually deep, and his precision was remarkable. Then, without warning, his eyes flared purple. The pressure of his magic intensified dramatically, startling even Quasar. Before she could speak, a deafening explosion shook the air outside. Panic rippled through the tavern as patrons shouted, wondering if the city was under attack. Someone rushed outside to investigate. Suddenly, Quasar seized the boy's hand. She whispered urgently for him to stay quiet and follow her. As city guards began searching for the source of the blast, she pulled him into a narrow alley, moving quickly through the chaos. Confused and alarmed, the boy called out to her, asking what was happening. But for now, she only kept moving. Quasar suddenly halted in the narrow alley and turned to face him. Her expression hardened as she told him to listen closely to every word that followed. Sensing the gravity of the moment, the boy straightened and nodded, signaling that he was ready. She explained that the noble class fiercely guarded its privileges, and among them, magic stood above all else. Innate talent was considered a divine blessing only when it appeared in noble bloodlines. Commoners, on the other hand, were rarely allowed the chance to evolve, making any sign of unusual strength deeply unsettling to those in power. What he had displayed moments ago, she continued, was far beyond ordinary. She revealed that he had unconsciously cast a 2-star spell, auditory hallucination. As her words settled, a familiar translucent system panel appeared before his eyes, confirming that at the age of 14 he had officially advanced to a 2-star mage. From that day forward, Quasar remained by his side, traveling together and teaching him several additional spells. Time flowed steadily, and a year passed before she received an offer she could not decline. She was appointed as a private instructor to the ruling family of Elvester County, an influential noble house. Such a position was considered a rare honor, one that most mages would never encounter in their lifetime. Before departing, she entrusted him with a 2-star spell book as a parting gift. Left alone in his room, the boy studied the book carefully, treating it as both a lesson and a reminder. Another year slipped by, during which he independently mastered 2 more 2-star spells. Now 16, his ambition remained unshaken. If anything, his resolve only deepened. One evening at the tavern, the manager excitedly called out his name, barely able to contain himself. He claimed to have finally secured a lucrative request. Curious, the boy asked for details. Grinning from ear to ear, the manager revealed that the commission came from House Duplain of the Grand Duchy. The boy was immediately taken aback. He questioned why such a powerful noble house would seek help from a modest tavern operation. The manager, however, was thrilled beyond reason. House Duplain was infamous for its wealth, spending gold without restraint. Grabbing the boy's arm, he insisted this was a rare chance to establish valuable connections. Unmoved, the young mage simply asked what the job involved. The manager explained that the task was straightforward, eliminating monsters within their territory. The simplicity of the explanation only made the boy more suspicious. For a family of that stature, such a request made no sense. Without hesitation, he declined the job and told the manager to find someone else. As he headed for the exit, he calmly stated that he avoided assignments that felt off. The manager hurried after him, clearly desperate. He argued that the request specifically required a mage, and mages were scarce. He insisted that the boy was the only viable candidate. Even then, the young mage prepared to refuse again, unwilling to invite unnecessary danger. That was when the manager placed a gold coin into his hand as an advance. Faced with the weight of real gold, the boy paused, then accepted both the payment and the questionable commission. Not long after, he met the clients, a trio shrouded in mystery. As the manager began the introductions, the man wearing a monocle immediately dismissed him. The client scoffed, stating that he had expected someone more capable, not a child. The manager rushed to defend him, claiming that the boy was the most skilled mage he knew. The man paid no attention. Turning away, he declared that the task was unsuitable for someone so young and prepared to leave, whispering something to his companion. At that moment, the cloaked figure among the 3 stepped forward. Their presence alone carried an undeniable pressure. The hooded stranger finally spoke, calling Derek by name and insisting they speak in private. Before any answers could be given, the scene shifted far away to the Grand Duchy of Duplain, a land blanketed by endless forests. There, the mission was already underway. The young mercenary had accepted the request and was locked in combat with a goblin. His crimson eyes burned with sharp focus as he read every movement of his enemy. Steel flashed. With a clean, decisive strike, he cut the creature down, his swordsmanship precise and efficient. He barely had a moment to steady his breathing before another goblin, larger and far more ferocious, charged forward, roaring as it swung a heavy axe. Reacting instantly, he twisted his body aside, narrowly avoiding the deadly blow. His feet slid across the forest floor as he prepared to retaliate. The clash ended quickly. When silence returned, the boy stood over the fallen body, dirt and blood clinging to his clothes. Without hesitation, he raised his hand and released a violent surge of lightning. The spell tore through the forest, erasing the remaining goblins in one devastating sweep. Exhausted, he reported back to the dispatch officer, stating calmly that the task had been completed. The 3 clients who had hired him exchanged unimpressed looks, clearly underwhelmed by the sight of such a young mercenary. Only the cloaked individual seemed pleased, smiling faintly as they remarked on how swiftly the goblins had been eliminated. Later that night, the streets around Belden's Tier Tavern buzzed with noise and activity. Inside, a blonde girl named Pelin was shouting angrily at the young man. The tavern manager struggled to restrain her as she accused him of degrading himself by serving nobles. Leaning close, the manager muttered that Derek had never mentioned the payment details to her. Raising one finger, the man let the silence stretch. Pelin scoffed, assuming the advance was no more than a single silver coin. The manager's smug grin told her otherwise. When he revealed that the upfront payment was actually 1 gold coin, her reaction was immediate, pure shock. The excitement overwhelmed her. Bursting with enthusiasm, she declared she wanted to take the job too. Moments later, she collapsed from sheer joy. Once things settled, the manager asked about the mission. The boy shrugged and replied that it had been simple, just goblins. However, he added something unexpected. Despite their appearance, the clients hadn't been entirely honest. The manager blinked, unsure if he'd heard correctly. Taking a slow drink, the boy explained that the so-called noble lacked 3 key traits expected of his rank. As for the maid, she was clearly pretending. Her hands had been far too clean, untouched by the kind of labor servants endured daily. Before he could mention the third inconsistency, the manager interrupted, calling his name sharply. The boy fell silent, listening as the man reminded him of an important truth. Mercenaries weren't paid to question motives. Their job was to survive, complete the task, and collect the reward. The young mercenary accepted that reasoning without argument. The following day, they returned to Duplain to conclude the job officially. Dereric reported that the goblin threat had been dealt with and wouldn't resurface anytime soon. The client praised his work and handed over the remaining payment, 2 gleaming gold coins. The manager nearly lost control, cheering loudly as he grabbed the coins and ruffled Dereric's hair in delight. The noble cleared his throat, bringing their attention back. He then expressed interest in making another request, leaving the manager stunned. When the payment was revealed, 15 gold coins, the man froze in disbelief. Faced with the offer, the noble asked directly if Dereric would accept. The young mage met his gaze and agreed without hesitation. They soon departed in a lavish carriage, traveling toward the next destination. Upon arrival, they found themselves before the grand estate of the Grand Duchy of Duplain. The mansion's sheer size left the manager speechless. Before entering, the noble insisted on formal introductions, despite the manager thinking it unnecessary. The man revealed himself as Dylan, the head butler serving the Grand Duke. Panic instantly overtook the manager. Shortly after, the woman stepped forward and introduced herself as Katerina, the estate's head housekeeper. Finally, the cloaked individual removed any doubt, revealing his identity as Jaden, captain of the Belden mercenaries. Only then did the young mercenary realize the truth. They had all concealed their real status, each holding far more authority than they had claimed. As Katerina led them into the massive residence, the manager finally understood just how significant their client truly was. The cloaked figure slowly lifted their hood. Dereric remained silent, watching closely as the hidden face was finally revealed. It was a young woman. Calm and composed, she introduced herself as Aline Duplain. Without hesitation, she explained her purpose. She wished to hire him as a tutor for her younger sister, Daila. The request left Dereric stunned. Teaching magic to a noble's daughter was far beyond anything he had expected. The scene shifted deeper into the Duplain family mansion, a vast estate that radiated authority and history. Suddenly, the heavy door of an office burst open with a violent crash. A young man named Rig stormed inside, dragging a trembling servant girl by her hair. His anger filled the room as he confronted his father and his older brother, Valerian. The man seated at the desk ordered Rig to calm himself and behave with some dignity. Rig snapped back, shouting that dignity was the last thing Della understood. The maid he was dragging sobbed uncontrollably, clearly injured and terrified. Valerian cut in sharply, demanding that his brother lower his voice since they were in the middle of an important discussion. Rig ignored the warning. He snarled that more than 10 servants had quit within the past month and demanded to know how long their father intended to tolerate Della's behavior. Valerian finally stood up and shouted his brother's name, ordering him to stop. He told Rig to end the disturbance and leave at once. Rig refused, glaring at his father with open disdain. Valerian reminded him that even if Della was problematic, they still had their sister Aline. Rig scoffed and coldly suggested it was time to dispose of the girl entirely. His father's voice hardened immediately, warning that such a decision was not Rig's to make. Unwilling to back down, Rig argued that sending Della to a distant monastery would solve everything. In a flash of fury, their father seized Rig by the collar and slammed his head into the wooden desk with overwhelming strength. Despite his injuries, Rig was ordered to stay silent and remember his place. As he staggered out of the room, Rig muttered that one day his father would be forced to choose. The Grand Duke watched him leave, his expression grim and troubled. Back in the present, Aline guided Dereric through the mansion's long, echoing corridors. She asked if he recognized the name Della. He replied that he had seen it listed in the family records. Aline smiled faintly and explained that her sister rarely appeared in public. They stopped before an enormous, ornately carved door. At that moment, Valerian emerged from the office, supporting Rig, whose face was badly bruised. Valerian greeted Aline warmly and asked about her time in Ibelstein. She replied that thanks to his concern, she had been living comfortably. Valerian excused himself, saying Rig needed attention, and led his brother away. Dereric watched the exchange silently, his red eyes faintly glowing as he processed what he had seen. As they passed, he noticed the same maid from earlier, crouched in the corner of the hallway, crying softly. Only then did the weight of the situation surrounding Della truly settle in his mind. Soon after, Aline and Dereric sat down to formally discuss the arrangement. She thanked her father and introduced Dereric as the tutor who would oversee Della's education. The Grand Duke studied the young mage carefully, his gaze sharp and unreadable. Aline excused herself, sensing her father was busy, and guided Dereric toward the exit. Just before they could leave, the Grand Duke spoke, instructing Dereric to stay behind. The boy turned back calmly, meeting the man's serious gaze. Sunlight poured through the tall office windows as the Grand Duke continued writing on a scroll with precise, elegant strokes. Without looking up, he remarked on how young Dereric appeared and questioned whether he was truly 16. Seated comfortably across from him, Dereric answered without hesitation, confirming his age. The quiet tension in the room made it clear that this conversation was only just beginning. The Grand Duke studied the young man for a moment before asking whether he could use magic at all. Dereric answered calmly, stating that he was capable of casting one-star spells. A brief laugh escaped the noble, amused by the predictability of the response. However, his expression quickly hardened. He warned that humility was not always interpreted as a virtue, especially in certain circles. Dereric understood the implication immediately and chose to remain quiet. As he assessed the situation, he realized that modesty would hold little value in front of a 5-star mage. He apologized if his words had sounded disrespectful, but the Grand Duke waved it off, saying he understood the reason behind the boy's attitude. The noble remarked that judging by his age and worn clothing, Dereric hardly resembled a magic instructor. A faint smile appeared on the boy's face as he clarified that he was, in fact, a mercenary. That answer seemed to satisfy the Grand Duke, who decided not to pry further. He granted Dereric permission to stay in the mansion's annex and instructed a maid to escort him. Before leaving, however, Dereric asked to speak once more. The Grand Duke paused and allowed him to continue, giving him his full attention. Dereric explained that as a mercenary, he was bound to complete any mission he accepted. Aline had hired him so that Diala could learn magic and gain the refinement needed to enter high society. The explanation seemed obvious to the noble, who asked why the boy felt the need to state it aloud. Meeting his gaze with seriousness, Dereric admitted that he had a personal request to make. The Grand Duke frowned slightly, confused by the sudden turn of the conversation. The scene abruptly shifted. A porcelain plate flew across a lavish room, smashing violently against the wall. Shards scattered as a maid cried out in terror. Trembling, she apologized to Della, but the girl coldly replied that apologies were meaningless. Enraged, she threatened the servant and ordered her out of her sight at once. Elsewhere, Jaden spoke quietly with Aline, questioning her choice of tutor. He pointed out that a commoner would struggle to teach a noble, especially when they had access to better options. Aline explained that she had already tried the most renowned mages, but each of them had quit. That was why she chose a different approach. Jaden noted that Dereric's former master had been a noble, meaning he had at least been exposed to aristocratic culture. Aline agreed, adding that the boy appeared composed and refined enough to guide Diala. With a knowing smile, Jaden advised her to sharpen her ability to judge people. He revealed that Dereric had grown up on the streets and became a mercenary at a very young age. Aline listened carefully, her expression turning thoughtful. The scene shifted again. Dereric was led through the mansion's long corridors by Dylan and a maid. They stopped before an enormous door that seemed to loom over him. Sensing the gravity of what awaited him inside, he raised his hand and knocked firmly. He waited calmly, but no answer came. After a brief pause, he pushed the door open and stepped inside. With a steady voice, he offered a simple greeting. Introducing himself, Dereric addressed Diala and politely asked for a moment alone so they could speak. Without turning around, the girl ordered the boy to come closer. Dereric complied, stepping forward at a measured pace. As the distance between them closed, a sly curve formed on Della's lips. In the next instant, she flung the contents of a cup straight at his face. The liquid splashed into his hair and ran down his cheeks, dripping slowly onto the floor. She smiled cruelly, remarking that she had mistaken him for a sewer creature invading her room. Repeating the insult, she asked if he was the mercenary the butler had mentioned. Resting lazily against a chair, she continued to stare at him with open disdain. Then, climbing onto a small table to loom over him, she grabbed a bucket and dumped its foul contents over his head. Filthy water poured down his clothes, soaking him completely. Dereric didn't move. He stood there silently as the water slid off him. Della clicked her tongue, complaining that the bucket was empty and that the humiliation hadn't been as satisfying as she'd hoped. That was when Derek slowly raised his head. His eyes burned with restrained fury. The sudden shift startled her. Shock flashed across her face before she lashed out, attempting to kick him. He reacted instantly, catching her foot midair with ease. Losing balance atop the table, she flailed helplessly before crashing onto the floor. Grimacing, she covered her nose and complained about the stench. One of her shoes slipped off and landed against Derek's shoulder. He remained where he was, watching her calmly. Using the table to steady herself, Della stood back up and sneered, calling him a sewer rat once more. She questioned how someone like him could ever teach her. The scene briefly shifted. The Grand Duke stood by a window, gazing outside as he considered Derek's earlier request. The boy had said plainly that his presence meant Della's issue wasn't simple. He asked how much authority the Duke was truly willing to grant him. The noble had answered only with silence, his sharp eyes weighing the implications. Back in the present, Della remained on the floor, her face flushed, eyes wide with disbelief. Derek looked down at her, his expression unreadable. She followed his every movement, fear creeping into her gaze. In a low, commanding voice, he ordered her to stand up immediately. No protests. The memory shifted again. 3 years earlier, Derek sat on a cart beside Quesa, asking how she would handle a defiant student. She answered calmly, saying she would try to understand them first, to guide them with patience. He found the idea naive and asked what should be done if that failed. Quesa replied that teaching was about direction, and when understanding failed, another method was required. Her tone darkened as she revealed the alternative, instilling fear. The present returned. Della was still frozen on the floor. Derek repeated his demand, telling her to show respect and stand without forcing him to repeat himself. She began to rise, rage etched across her face. Halfway up, she screamed and threw a punch at him. Derek moved faster. His hand struck her face cleanly. Coldly, he warned her that he would not repeat his instructions, and that she would learn to treat others properly. Stunned, Della stared at him, disbelief twisting into fury. She screamed for the butler, shouting that a commoner had dared to touch her. Moments later, Dylan burst into the room with 2 maids, demanding to know what had happened. He turned on Derek, furious, asking what he thought he was doing. Calm as ever, Derek produced a scroll and handed it over. He stated that the Grand Duke had granted him full authority over Della's education. Dylan's expression drained as he examined the seal with his monocle. Della froze, realization finally sinking in. That night, moonlight bathed the massive Duplain estate. In the corridors, Valerian stormed ahead while Rig struggled to restrain him. Valerian burst into a room and demanded to know if Derek was the mercenary in question. The boy looked up from his book in silence. Enraged, Valerian lunged forward, accusing him of striking his sister. Derek calmly replied that the Grand Duke himself had approved his actions. Rig reminded Valerian that both Aline and their father had sanctioned it. Valerian snapped at Rig to stay out of it and ordered Derek to follow him elsewhere. Rig smirked, remarking that Della needed a lesson and that Valerian wouldn't go too far. Derek watched them leave without comment. Rig scoffed, questioning why his brother continued to protect such a hopeless girl. The scene faded to the image of a much younger Della, small, frightened, and utterly alone. Back in the present, Valerian led Derek to a closed door and gestured for him to enter. He explained quietly that this had once been Della's room, left exactly as it was since her removal. The space felt frozen in time. Derek's attention was drawn to an easel near the window. A half-finished painting rested there, its colors vivid yet incomplete. Valerian spoke softly, revealing that his sister had loved drawing. She would eagerly call him over to show her work, her eyes shining with excitement. Yet she never completed her paintings, only filling in the parts that pleased her most, abandoning the rest. After a pause, Valerian apologized for losing his temper earlier. Derek dismissed it calmly, then asked why he had been brought into a room filled with unfinished art. Valerian's expression darkened. He said Della had never deserved ridicule, but she became consumed by the family's obsession with bloodlines. That fixation eventually led to her expulsion from the main residence and confinement within the annex. His voice wavered as he admitted that if she could even learn one-star magic, he might persuade their father to reconsider. Gripping Derek's sleeves tightly, Valerian begged him to help his sister. Derek stopped him and asked for a moment to think. He pointed out that Della hadn't truly abandoned magic. The books she owned were filled with handwritten notes. He asked if those tomes came from the School of Regulations, and Valerian confirmed it immediately. A realization settled over Derek's face. Another unfinished painting caught his eye, this one depicting a forest, vibrant yet incomplete. Holding one of the magic books, his gaze hardened with resolve. He handed the book back and said simply that he would try. Night fell over the massive Duplain estate. In the annex, Della slept unaware until icy water crashed over her without warning. She jolted awake, screaming, soaked to the bone. Standing over her, Dereric smiled faintly and asked if she truly thought this was the time to sleep. Furious, she shouted that he had lost his mind, demanding to know how he dared enter her room. Ignoring her protests, he seized her arm and told her they were going somewhere important. She screamed for help as he dragged her through the corridors, but no one came. Unbothered, Dereric pulled her beyond the mansion walls and toward the shadowed forest. Once there, he shoved her to the ground. Pain shot through her as she cried out. She yelled that he was delusional if he thought this cruelty could teach her anything. Dereric replied calmly that she never listened and asked if she wanted to hear something interesting. A chilling smile crossed his face as he confessed that he took pleasure in putting arrogant nobles in their place. Fear overtook her. She demanded to know what he meant. He leaned closer, whispering that the tutoring arrangement was merely an excuse to get close enough to break people like her. Drawing his sword, he remarked coldly on how beautiful noble screams sounded. Backing away in terror, Della demanded to know if he thought he would escape punishment. Sword in hand, Dereric reminded her that she was destined for a monastery and that no one would believe her story. If something happened, he said, he could simply pay with his life, doing her family a favor by removing her. Panic seized her. Realizing she would die if she stayed, Della scrambled to her feet and fled into the forest. She knew the terrain well enough to lose him, and if she could return to the mansion, she believed he would be the one destroyed. Then she felt it. A wave of heat surged behind her. Flames gathered in the darkness as a massive fireball formed midair. Without hesitation, Dereric released the spell toward her. Della glanced back in horror, recognizing the magic instantly. A 2-star fire spell. Impossible, for a mere commoner. Despair flooded her eyes as Dereric watched calmly, a cruel smile on his face. The fireball struck the ground just behind her, the heat rushing forward like a living beast. She screamed as the explosion erupted, the shockwave hurling her through the air and slamming her into the forest floor. Collapsed against the cold forest floor, Della struggled to swallow as fear crushed her chest. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears. Footsteps approached, unhurried. When she looked up, Dereric was already there, wearing a faint smile as he remarked that his spell seemed to have missed. She forced herself upright and ran again, lungs burning as branches scraped her skin. Hatred twisted her expression as she glanced back, refusing to let terror be the last thing she showed him. But her strength failed her. Her foot caught on an exposed root, and she crashed hard onto the ground, every muscle screaming in protest. She tried to rise, but froze. An icy blade hovered inches from her face, radiating cold light that pierced the darkness. The glowing ice arrow hummed with lethal intent. Her breath caught as it shot past her cheek and embedded itself into the earth ahead, frost spreading across the soil. Della couldn't move. Dereric calmly praised her speed, remarking that it was impressive for someone confined to the annex. She gasped for air, staring at him in pure terror. Still refusing to surrender, she dragged herself upright and fled once more into the forest. He didn't chase her. He simply watched, a small curve at the corner of his lips, as she ran on borrowed strength. Panic consumed her. She knew she couldn't keep this up. Every direction felt the same. Every shadow threatened to swallow her. Dereric knelt and pressed his hand to the ground. A faint glow spread as a tracking spell activated. When he lifted his gaze, her path was already clear to him. As he followed, something clicked. This forest, its rhythm, its silence, matched the unfinished paintings he had seen. He finally understood. She hadn't merely painted scenery. She had poured her connection to this place onto canvas, capturing emotion rather than form. Her potential had always been there. Cornered at last, Della screamed and hurled a stone at him with all the strength she had left. Dereric didn't flinch. In one smooth motion, his blade flashed, splitting the rock cleanly in two. Her eyes widened in shock. He acknowledged her resolve, noting that she chose to fight instead of continuing to run. But her legs gave out. She collapsed, utterly drained. Dereric stepped closer, pointing out that she had no strength left. His sword lowered toward her as he asked if she had any final words. She laughed, bitter and broken, and met his gaze with open defiance. She said she would never apologize and dared him to finish it. Instead, he asked her why she clung so desperately to bloodline superiority. Silence followed. Tears welled in her eyes as the question sank in. At last, she whispered that without her bloodline, she had nothing. The words cracked her voice apart. Suddenly, she screamed, repeating the word magic again and again, rage and despair tearing through her. She demanded to know if he thought she had never tried. Dereric said nothing. She sobbed that no matter how hard she worked, it never mattered. With tears streaming down her face, Della stared at the ground, asking herself what she had left, if her bloodline was all she had ever been allowed to hold on to. Della's voice faltered as she questioned who she truly was, her words dissolving into the night air. Dereric did not answer. He simply stood there, watching, allowing silence to stretch between them. For a brief moment, it seemed as though he was weighing something unseen. Then, a soft blue glow gathered along the edge of his blade. Della lifted her tear-streaked face, confusion and fear colliding in her eyes as she tried to read his intent. Dereric raised his sword and spoke coldly, saying he had listened to enough of her self-pity for one night. His tone carried no warmth as he offered his farewell. Panic struck instantly. Without hesitation, he brought the blade down with full force. Della shut her eyes tight, bracing for the end. Her body tensed, waiting for pain that never came. Seconds passed. When she dared to open her eyes, she froze in disbelief. A towering wall of jagged ice crystals stood before her, shimmering faintly in the darkness. She stared at it, breath caught in her throat. On the opposite side of the frozen barrier, Dereric stood calmly, watching her reaction. At that moment, Della felt a strange sensation surge through her arms. She looked down as her hands began to glow with a faint blue light. She had done it. Her mana had responded. Dereric smoothly returned his sword to its sheath and offered her a quiet congratulation, followed by an apology for his earlier harshness. Della could only stare, her mind struggling to keep up with what had just happened. He explained that what she experienced was merely mana manifestation, but the fact that she achieved it at all mattered. The realization broke her composure completely. Tears streamed freely as she laughed and cried at the same time, overwhelmed by joy. She shouted in relief, celebrating the fact that she had finally used magic, even if only a trace. Dereric remained nearby, allowing her to release everything she had bottled up for so long. Once she calmed, he told her that she belonged to the school of the wild. The statement left her stunned. He went on to explain that most nobles are taught through the school of regulation, which was why she had always struggled. For her, forcing that system was like wearing clothes that were never meant to fit. Della asked how he had known so quickly. With a faint smile, Dereric said he had seen her paintings and felt the mana embedded within them. He explained that mages of the wild resonate with nature instinctively, often expressing it long before they realize what it is. Understanding dawned across her face. He rose to his feet and told her that was enough for one night. While she had awakened her mana, her journey was only beginning. As he turned to leave, Della called his name. He paused and faced her. Embarrassed, arms folded tightly, she thanked him in a small voice. Dereric hesitated, unsure how to respond, then simply told her it was time to go. Together, they headed back toward the mansion. Along the way, he remarked on one of her paintings. She quietly admitted it was her finest work. The next morning, sunlight poured into the room, marking the start of something new. Della woke in her bed feeling different, steadier, more focused. With renewed determination, she raised her hand and closed her eyes, carefully attempting to call forth her mana once again. Della fixed her gaze on her outstretched hand, brow furrowed in concentration. She tried to guide the unfamiliar energy coursing inside her body, but the moment she attempted to shape it, the power slipped away like mist. The faint glow vanished, leaving her staring at her palm in frustration. Even now, controlling mana felt far more difficult than she had imagined. Outside her room, a maid approached with a laundry basket balanced against her hip. At that moment, the door flew open without warning. The servant shrieked in shock, stumbling backward. The bucket she carried tipped over, and murky water spilled across the floor, splashing over Della's bare feet. The young noble did not move. Trembling, the maid dropped to her knees and apologized over and over, her voice shaking with fear. She fully expected punishment, just as before. Della stared at her in silence, her expression dark and unreadable. The pause stretched long enough for the servant to panic further, pressing her forehead to the floor as she begged for mercy. Then, calmly, Della spoke. "Be more careful next time." Without another word, she turned and walked away. The maid remained frozen on the floor, stunned. She couldn't understand it. There was no slap, no shouting, no cruelty. Other servants soon gathered, whispering in disbelief when they learned that the young noble had let her go with only a warning. Elsewhere in the mansion, Dereric slept soundly, completely unaware of the uproar. That peace shattered when loud knocking echoed through his door, accompanied by someone calling his name. Groggy, he sat up and rubbed his eyes, still trying to process what was happening. Before he could respond, the door burst open. Della stormed in with Dylan close behind her and demanded that Dereric teach her how to control her mana. Dylan stared at her in shock, struggling to believe that she had actually succeeded in manifesting magic. Della ignored his reaction entirely and fixed her gaze on Dereric, repeating her demand. Clearly uninterested in arguing so early in the morning, Dereric told her to return in the afternoon. Then, without further explanation, he shut the door. Dylan stood there, overwhelmed by emotion at the change he had witnessed in Della. She, however, was far from moved. Anger flared instantly. She pounded on the door, shouting for Dereric to come back and teach her immediately. The only response she received was silence as he returned to sleep, leaving her fuming in the hallway. By afternoon, sunlight bathed the massive Duplain mansion in warmth. Through its long corridors, footsteps echoed with purpose. Two maids whispered nearby, gossiping about how Della hadn't broken anything that day. One of them added in a hushed voice that the young noble had even awakened her magic. Rieg, passing by, stopped short when he overheard them. His eyes widened as he turned sharply toward the servants, demanding they repeat what they had just said. Meanwhile, in his office, the Grand Duke calmly continued writing until Icelandine informed him of the news. According to the servants, Della had indeed manifested magic. The man finally relaxed, a trace of relief crossing his features. Ra, however, warned against celebrating too soon. Manifesting mana alone proved nothing. Ace Lion bristled at her words, snapping that their sister deserved praise for even reaching this point. Their father listened quietly as the argument unfolded, his expression unreadable. Rieg reminded them of Della's past behavior and insisted that this alone was not enough to spare her from being sent to the convent. The Grand Duke said nothing, clearly weighing his next decision. Back in her room, Della sat with her back turned, arms crossed, sulking. Dereric approached and asked if she was angry because he had shut the door on her earlier. Without facing him, she replied that she wasn't upset, she was furious. He warned her that throwing a tantrum would not change the situation. Della snapped back that she wasn't being stubborn, just angry. Calmly, Dereric explained that rushing things would only make matters worse and that progress required patience and proper order. Finally losing her temper, Della spun around and shouted that she had already said she was angry, not sulking. Dereric said nothing. He simply looked at her, his silence heavier than any scolding. Realizing it wasn't working, she sighed and muttered that fine. If he insisted, then she was pouting. That finally prompted a reaction. Dereric leaned against the chair and began explaining. Just because she had awakened mana didn't mean she was ready to wield it freely. Della yawned and complained that he sounded like a rigid, overly serious instructor. His expression darkened. He asked if she would prefer a less, by-the-book, method. Instantly, memories of the forest and his terrifying presence flooded her mind. Her posture straightened, fear wiping away her attitude in an instant. She quickly apologized, telling him to forget what she said and continue the lesson properly. Dereric nodded, and the lesson finally began. Dereric began the lesson by stating their goal clearly. They would focus on manifesting magic. He explained that the School of the Wild followed no rigid formulas. Instead of rules, it valued instinct, freedom, and harmony with one's natural disposition. As he spoke, he added that this approach suited Della perfectly. The words caught her off guard. He went on to say that her temperament aligned naturally with the wild path, and combined with her noble bloodline, it gave her a strong foundation. Della froze for a moment before her cheeks flushed. She hesitated, then asked if he truly believed she was talented. When he confirmed it calmly, her excitement exploded. She jumped to her feet, eyes shining, and eagerly asked if that meant she was some kind of prodigy. The conversation quickly spiraled into a heated back and forth over whether talent alone qualified someone as a magic genius. Outside the room, Rieg overheard their voices through the door. His expression darkened as he listened. After a brief pause, he clicked his tongue in irritation and walked away, clearly troubled by his sister's rapid progress. The following days passed in a blur of relentless training within the Duplain mansion. Della barged into Dereric's room one morning, proudly declaring that she could summon mana but still struggled to guide it properly. On another occasion, she interrupted him during lunch just to demonstrate her newly awakened cold-type magic. Day after day, she dragged him aside at every opportunity, eager to show how much she had improved. One afternoon, she spotted him sitting beneath a tree, quietly reading. Furious, she stormed over and accused him of abandoning her training after ordering her to remain in the annex. Without the slightest hint of guilt, Dereric replied that this was exactly why he had brought the books. Unconvinced, Della declared that she had finally managed to make her mana flow properly and immediately grabbed him, insisting he witness her progress. Elsewhere in the mansion, Valerian stood by a window, waiting. When the door finally opened and Dereric entered, the noble invited him to sit. Once settled, Valerian asked about Della's advancement. Dereric answered honestly. She had made impressive strides, but mastering even a single star spell would take time. Valerian nodded, then mentioned that their mother would return from a meeting the following week. He warned Dronzer that she was difficult to handle and that nobles generally disapproved of commoners occupying significant roles. Dronzer acknowledged the warning and asked if that was the reason he had been summoned. Valerian fell silent, clearly choosing his words carefully. He then revealed that he would soon become the head of House Duplain and that such a position carried immense responsibility. He spoke about sincerity, appearances, and how complicated people's hearts could be. Losing patience, Dronzer cut in and asked him to get to the point. Clenching his fist, Valerian finally confessed the real issue. In a petulant tone, he complained that Della no longer wanted to spend time with him. Dronzer stared at him blankly, unsure how to respond. Valerian reminisced about their childhood, recalling how she used to greet him with a bright smile. Now, she only followed Dronzer around, ignoring everyone else. Desperate, he begged for advice on how to regain her attention. As proof of his effort, he pulled out a doll he had learned to make from the maids, proudly asking if it resembled Della. Dronzer eyed it darkly and asked if he was attempting some kind of curse. Offended, Valerian began to whine, then finally gave up, declaring Dronzer completely useless for emotional matters. Not long after, Dronzer encountered Mela Duplain alongside her servants. Wearing a pleasant smile, she remarked that she had heard they had found a remarkably capable magic tutor. Introducing herself formally, she offered a gift from her territory as a gesture of goodwill. Dronzer refused immediately, stating that he was not affiliated with any noble house. Confused, Mela asked what he meant. With a calm but firm expression, he replied that he was merely a commoner. The revelation left her stunned. The narrative then flashed back to a week earlier at the mansion gates. Aline thanked Dronzer for accepting the responsibility of caring for her sister. With a gentle smile, she explained that she needed to return to Ebelstein and would leave Della in his care. Dronzer confirmed his understanding. The tavern manager nearby joked that his reply sounded far too lifeless and warned him to settle things quickly, as Pelin would surely complain otherwise. Dronzer simply watched as the carriage disappeared down the road. Moments later, Aline suddenly panicked, realizing she had forgotten something important. Her mother would be returning the following week. Dronzer didn't understand why this mattered until Aline described her mother as a walking embodiment of fury. Back in the present, Mela's voice echoed through the mansion as she berated her husband over their daughter's commoner tutor. Calmly, the Grand Duke asked her to lower her voice. She ignored him, insisting that the real issue was Della herself. The Duke admitted that he also disliked assigning such roles to commoners, but reminded her that every noble tutor they hired had resigned. In the end, he emphasized one key fact: it was Aline who had recommended Dronzer. Despite everything, Mela refused to back down. She argued that House Duplain had to uphold its prestige and suggested that her younger brother, Flam, take over as Della's tutor. The idea made the Grand Duke frown immediately. Pulling Flam away from his responsibilities for private instruction struck him as unreasonable. Mela, however, exploded. She claimed that social standing was its own battlefield, one that required constant strategy. Pointing sharply at her husband, she declared that their daughter would become the laughingstock of noble society if she continued studying under a nameless commoner. Valerian stepped forward, urging his mother to calm herself and stop arguing with their father. She ignored him completely and ordered him to leave, insisting the issue was far too serious for interference. Rig then spoke up, redirecting the argument. He remarked that the real question wasn't status, but whether the commoner actually possessed the ability to teach. Mela smiled at his words, clearly pleased, while Valerian's worry deepened. Rig continued, saying that although a commoner instructing a noble was unusual, it could be tolerated if the tutor proved his worth. He proposed testing Dronzer through a magic duel. The Grand Duke immediately shut the idea down, warning his son that Dronzer was a genuine mage. Rig scowled, irritated at being contradicted. Unwilling to concede, he suggested a different approach, testing Della instead. Valerian stared at him, baffled. Rig explained calmly that if Dronzer truly was a competent teacher, then Della's improvement would speak for itself. The Grand Duke remained silent, clearly weighing the idea. Valerian tried to object, but Rig was already walking away, intent on carrying out his plan. As they left the room, Valerian demanded to know if his brother had lost his mind, proposing such a thing for their sister. Rig countered that Della had changed and reminded him of the trouble she had caused in the past. Valerian insisted she was their only sister and needed protection no matter what. Rig laughed bitterly and asked if he truly believed in that cursed bloodline rhetoric. He shouted that the same blood had nearly destroyed their family countless times. Valerian froze, stunned by the venom in his brother's words. Rig coldly declared that Della's best fate was remaining locked away in the annex forever before leaving. Left alone in the hallway, Valerian watched him go, his face tight with resolve as an unspoken plan began forming in his mind. Later that day, birds chirped calmly near the mansion grounds. The peace shattered when Della stormed into Derek's room, her eyes blazing with excitement. He glanced up at her with clear impatience and asked what she wanted so early. A scroll slammed down onto the book he was reading. Arms crossed, she warned him bluntly. If she lost the upcoming duel, he was fired. Derek read the document and pointed out calmly that Rig was already a seasoned one-star mage, making victory unlikely. Della erupted, shouting that if she lost, he would pay the price. Unbothered, Derek replied with a faint smile that he was a mercenary, hired to do a job and nothing more. He added that he had already been paid well beyond what he expected. The words stunned her. She demanded to know if he truly didn't care about being dismissed. He didn't answer. His silence was enough. A week passed quickly, and the day of the duel finally arrived. An outdoor arena buzzed with anticipation as members of House Duplain and their servants gathered. The Grand Duke and Mela entered with commanding presence. When the Duke spotted Derek already waiting on the battlefield, the young mage bowed respectfully, his expression calm and unreadable. The Duke studied him closely, noting the complete absence of nerves. Taking his seat, he decided it wasn't yet time to discard such a composed tutor. Soon after, Rig stepped into the arena, his movements deliberate, his expression cold. He announced that this would not be a mere test. He intended to crush Della completely and make her regret every mistake she had ever made. Moments later, Della entered the field, cloaked in a hood, her face set with determination. Her thoughts drifted back to a previous conversation. She had asked Derek whether he truly didn't care what happened to her. He told her that her magical growth was already moving in the right direction. Confused and tearful, she questioned why he kept bringing up the Duplain bloodline. He reminded her that the School of the Wild emphasized self-discovery over rigid instruction. Desperate, she demanded to know why he was saying such things now. He offered no answer. Lowering her head, Della admitted she wasn't an ideal student. Still, she begged him not to abandon her. She didn't want another tutor. Derek listened in silence, his back turned. After a long pause, he admitted he knew nothing about noble duel etiquette. He had never fought under such rules. Memories surfaced, Della's life under constant judgment, whispered criticism, and disappointed stares. Derek said he could teach her how to win, if that was truly what she wanted. Images of her past failures flooded her mind. Tears streamed down her face as she agreed and asked him to make her victorious. That was why she stepped into the arena, not as Rig's younger sister, and not as the youngest of House Duplain. Derek understood. She stood there simply as a mage, and as his student, ready to fight. The battlefield fell silent as Daila stood at the front of the sparring ground, her posture steady but tense. The butler stepped forward and announced calmly, "We will apply the sparring rules of high-rank mages. Whichever side triggers General Salem's protective magic circle first will be declared the loser. With that, the match will begin." At his words, Daila lifted her gaze. Her eyes met Raig's. For a brief moment, the world seemed to narrow to that single exchange. Raig's expression was controlled, but there was something sharp lurking behind his gaze, an intent that made Daila's instincts flare with warning. The signal was given. Almost instantly, a magic pendant embedded near the platform's edge activated. A faint, shimmering light spread outward like ripples across water. Invisible lines traced themselves through the air, forming General Salem's phantom protective magic circle. It was an advanced construct, designed to nullify lethal damage and forcibly suppress spells before they could cause fatal harm. From the sidelines, Derek watched with narrowed eyes. So this is how nobles spar, he thought coldly. Expensive accessories just to avoid injuries. His gaze flicked briefly to the pendant, then back to the battlefield. It must be convenient to be rich enough to throw money away like this. The sparring duration had been set at 10 minutes. However, the moment Derek observed Raig's stance, he knew the match would not last nearly that long. Raig had no intention of dragging this out. Raig raised one hand. Dense purple mana gathered around his palm as he began chanting. The energy twisted violently, compressing into a sharp, unstable mass that crackled with pressure. The air itself seemed to vibrate under its weight. Daila looked up, her brows knitting together as the oppressive force washed over her. The raw intensity of the mana made her chest tighten. Raig's eyes hardened. Purple light erupted as the energy took form. "Sorry," he thought coldly, "but I need you back in the annex." He lunged forward without warning, shouting her name as he swung his arm down. A sharp slash of condensed energy tore through the air, screaming as it raced straight toward her. Daila's eyes flashed. At the very last instant she activated her ability and slipped aside. The attack grazed past her, missing by a hair's breadth before slamming into the ground behind her. Raid clicked his tongue, teeth grinding together. How dare she? He didn't hesitate. Another attack followed immediately, then another. Daila retreated, maintaining distance while keeping her focus locked firmly on his movements. Each step was precise, calculated. She refused to let herself panic. From the sidelines, Derek observed every exchange with a critical eye. She's handling one-star magic without trouble, he assessed. But when it comes to real combat, she's still inexperienced. His gaze sharpened. She's forcing the spell's trajectory instead of guiding it. At this rate, she'll burn through her mana quickly. A violent clash erupted as Raig's aggressive magic slammed into Daila's barrier. The mana shield flared brightly, rippling as sharp energy collided against its surface. The impact sent vibrations through her arms. Raig scoffed. She's not even using star rank magic, he sneered. It's just raw mana manifestation. Does she really think she can block me with something like this? Purple light surged again. This time, 3 condensed spheres of energy formed in his hand, each one pulsing with unstable power. His aura intensified, pressing down on the battlefield like a storm. If it's just a trick, Raig said coldly, I'll break through it with pure firepower. Try blocking this, Daila. Inside the barrier, Daila lifted her gaze. The mass of energy looming above her felt overwhelming, as if it could swallow her whole. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears. Suddenly, Derek's voice echoed in her memory. Remember this, Lady Daila. She could see him clearly, standing tall, eyes sharp, expression unwavering. Mercenaries don't fight like nobles, he had said. They don't believe in fairness or honor during combat. Their only goal is victory. His voice had been harsh, but truthful. This isn't a clean duel, Derek continued. And even if you win, you may still be criticized. Daila's breath steadied as the memory replayed. Even so, he had added, you can still choose an ending where you win. Her fear slowly receded, replaced by a burning resolve. Another memory surfaced. Are you really fine with that? Derek had asked, his gaze piercing. Of course. Daila had shouted back without hesitation. The memory shattered. She snapped back to reality. Her eyes sharpened as mana surged through her body. Raid gave her no time to recover. His attacks came in relentless succession, precise and unforgiving. Among mercenaries, Daila thought, there are people who win even when they're weaker. She lifted her gaze slightly. Those people don't duel, she murmured. They fight. Raig struggled to keep pace as he unleashed another sharp attack. The strike grazed past Daila's side, the wind pressure slicing dangerously close. She dodged just in time, feeling the chill of near impact. By fighting, her thoughts continued, they control the battlefield using terrain and timing. She forced herself to calm down. Instead of retreating further, Daila suddenly lowered her body and dropped to the ground. They use every method available to seize victory. Another attack lunged toward her. They never waste even a brief moment when their opponent lowers their guard. Raig's magic collided with her barrier again. This time, cracks spread rapidly across its surface. The shield trembled violently, teetering on the verge of collapse. Cold sweat slid down Daila's back. This is getting bad, she muttered through clenched teeth. Raig's voice cut through the tension. The game is over. He lunged forward. For a split second, Daila froze as the attack closed in. Then, boom! A violent explosion shook the ground. Stone shattered, and thick dust surged upward, swallowing the battlefield entirely. Derek stood rigid, eyes locked on the smoke-filled arena. Daila, her maid screamed. From the stands, Daila's mother shot to her feet, panic flooding her face. Daila, she cried, turning sharply toward the butler. Dallin, what are you doing? Stop the spell now, she's hurt. Her husband's voice cut through her panic. Sit down. The Duke's tone was firm, commanding. His gaze never left the battlefield. It's not over. But you saw it yourself, his wife protested. She was clearly hit. Wrong, the Duke interrupted sharply. General Phantom's magic circle didn't activate. He exhaled slowly, eyes narrowing. Then he glanced sideways at Derek. The young man hadn't even blinked. It was as if he had expected this outcome from the very beginning. On the battlefield, Reg stared into the smoky ground, confusion flashing across his face. She should have been hit, he muttered. Then why didn't the magic circle activate? Where did she go? His eyes widened. Movement. Crystals of sharp energy erupted from the ground beside him. Reg barely dodged, leaping away with a curse. His heart pounded as realization struck. The attack came from below the platform. If she left the platform, that should count as a loss, he thought sharply. Then he hesitated. His gaze flicked toward the butler. Does being below the platform not count as leaving it? Reg clenched his teeth. They probably never imagined a trick like this being used in a noble spar. Another attack burst from beneath the ground. He avoided it by a hair's breadth, his breathing growing heavier with each exchange. I can't even see her, he admitted grimly. Landing a hit like this will be difficult. His expression darkened. All she needs is one clean blow. This spar doesn't resemble a noble duel at all. Finally, Reg spotted her. Daila emerged from the ground, dirt clinging to her clothes. Slowly, she straightened and looked up at him. Rage burned in her crimson eyes, far removed from the calm expression she usually wore. Reg stiffened. I've seen that look before, he realized. The same look Derek had worn when my older brother grabbed him by the collar. Reg's gaze snapped toward Derek. There's no way she came up with this alone. His teeth ground together. That bastard, Derek, this was your plan. With a sharp motion, Reg removed his black coat and tossed it aside. His stance shifted completely, all traces of playfulness gone. Fine, he said coldly. I'll play along with your scheme, Derek.